What might keep you from successfully implementing leadership pipeline in your church? Let's explore that one today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, A.J. Mathieu. This week, we are landing this airplane. We are closing up this chapter in the book that is the Church Revitalization Podcast. We are ending our non-series series on leadership pipeline, and we're tackling overcoming obstacles in pipeline implementation. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but as we are looking to implement our leadership pipeline, what are some of the reasons why it might not work? We're going to tackle some of those common challenges today.
Yeah. Hey, let's just jump in. Now, these will apply to a lot of areas of ministry or initiatives.
That's true. Yeah, these are the same kinds of challenges that you see.
It's a pretty broad list. Yeah. So you might have seen, maybe this would just be helpful in just various areas of ministry. Like, hey, we try to do this, we try to do that. And here's what we found. So
that's true. Yeah, but the advice here, I do want to be fair. Like, as I explain these, it's going to be in the pipeline context.
Yeah. Yeah. The first one is simply just a resistance to change, which is very definitely a common issue across any change in the church. And I don't know. So this again, it is very common. We're going to give the same advice we probably would give to anybody doing anything. We've got to explain why. What is the why behind what we're doing? I think people getting the why just alleviates a lot of questions. Anytime we say we're going to do something different, there certainly is a section of people that are like, great, we're down for anything. Let's just do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other people. I'm one of those people that like, I got to know what's the thought process here. What are we going?
Literally just yesterday, I was texting AJ about an idea I had for something coming up. And I was like, here's a thing that we could offer. And I was getting the 9th degree from AJ in his text. And I'm like, I don't think you're understanding. I'm not taking away the other things we offer. I just think, what's the harm in offering this one other option? And if no one takes us up on it, there's no harm. But if one person does take us up on it, it would be a really cool partnership. And I was still getting the 9th degree from AJ, even though there's literally no risk.
I'm still not sold on it. And I even forgot about that conversation. We haven't even talked about it yet. So maybe
no need to get into it out of here, but I was like, dude, there's zero risk in this proposal. None.
You're going to have to explain yourself better than you did in that text message.
So AJ is my resistance to change.
That is true. I got to see the big picture. I got to understand what are we doing? You'll find other people like me. I'm sure you're frustrated by them as much as Scott is with me.
I'm not frustrated by it. It's helpful for me. Actually, okay, maybe this is a good segue. When you experience that resistance to change, you can think of it two ways. You can get frustrated. My initial reaction to AJ not being all on board with my idea yesterday was, what the heck, man? Why don't you see this my way as a totally easy win if even one person likes this idea?
Yeah.
That's my initial reaction.
Yeah.
Upon further inspection, it is exactly what you said. Maybe I'm not communicating this the right way. So you need to have a little bit of humility when there's that resistance to change and not go like, ugh, get with the program. It's instructive for you to go, okay, how can I communicate this? Now, resistance to change is not always a reflection of poor communication on your part. It probably is in the thing I've been talking about, but what it can be is exactly what you said, which is you have to explain why. And so here's how you overcome this resistance. One, in your communication, focus on the upsides. You don't need to give every detail. You just don't. Not everybody needs every detail. Some people will want more details than others, and you got to read that room. But most people don't need all the details. Just give the upsides. Here's why we're doing this. Here's how your life is going to be better. Here's what's going to change for you. The other strategy I would tell you is to focus on involving the squeaky wheels early. So when we talk about strategic envisioning and who we want to have on the strategic leadership team in that process, we will say, hey, this is not an olive branch opportunity. Don't invite people to be on the team who are just going to be, negative.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of the opposite advice, where I'm saying when you get to this point where you're going to implement the pipeline, figure out who you think is going to complain the most and involve them early on. You are not abandoning the process based on how they react, but you do want to include them early on. Say, hey, I would love your feedback. We're implementing this new coaching structure. Can I go through some of this with you first? Because they might even be offended. Their first reaction might be like, I don't need coaching. I've been volunteering in this area for 25 years. So approach them and go, hey, this isn't about coaching you. You've been doing this for 25 years. This is about helping us develop a coaching platform for all those new people who aren't as experienced as you. Can I start doing this coaching with you so I can get some feedback from you on this coaching process and how we can make it better and improve it? Do you see how that's a totally different thing versus, hey, we're doing this coaching now, you need to get with the program?
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
going to go well.
Yeah.
So involve them early and then solicit them as advocates. Hey, Jimmy, I know you've been doing this for 25 years. You've been doing this coaching. Do you think you could help me just get everybody else excited about this coaching process? If they see you've been doing it and they see you be positive about it, it'll really help with adoption. So the more you can include those stakeholders early on, the better.
Yeah, I mean, that's all just great advice for sure. And again, applicable to more than this, though in this specific instance, it's a big change.
Yeah, and I want to be sure I'm being clear. Don't do this in a patronizing way. Oh, hey, Jimmy, I know. Genuinely ask them for their feedback. I want your advice on how this coaching is going. The feedback you give me is going to inform how we do this. So don't patronize people.
Yeah.
People will be able to tell the difference.
Well, yes. And choose your words too, because it also isn't like, hey, we're thinking about doing something.
Yeah,
no,
we're
we
doing
are
this.
doing something, and I want to get you involved in
I
it.
want you involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Don't equivocate. Yeah, so that's good. I think those are all some great tips and examples for overcoming a basic resistance to change, helping meet expectations as much as we can on the front end, and then working through that. Yep.
Good.
Okay, so our second challenge is come in the form of resources. Are we going to have a lack of resources, or do we have unallocated things to be able to make this happen? So here's the thing. Implementing leadership pipeline in the church, while it may not have a huge cost, it's definitely not zero. It will be greater than $1 to implement it. And here's why. If you were with us last week, we talked about coaching times, meeting with people. Those are not all going to happen, 9 to 5. They're not on staff. They're not in the cubicle next to you. They're lay leaders. They've got jobs. They've got other responsibilities. You're probably meeting with them maybe over meal times or on personal time for them. And while, yeah, you could go, hey, can you just come up to the church at 7 o'clock and meet me in my office and we're going to talk? It's probably not the friendliest environment. Over coffee somewhere or maybe lunch or something is maybe a better way to do that. And obviously, we have to pay. We got to pay for coffee. We got to pay for food. Who's going to do that? You could also say, "Can you meet me for dinner at Red Lobster and bring you some cash?" Or you could pick up their Cheddar Bay biscuits for them and their surf and turf, I suppose. If you have a
Didn't Red Lobster go out of business?
big budget, no, well, not here in Texas. They're still around.
Huh.
I'm not advocating for Red Lobster. In fact, my wife would be like, "That's the last place I want somebody to give me a coaching meeting is Red Lobster." But
Yeah.
yeah,
So the point here is you're going to have these coaching meetings. Just establish what that policy is. Is everybody going Dutch when you have these meetings? Are these meetings supposed to happen at the church? Is there going to be an expense account for folks? Figure out what that policy is, communicate that policy, and make sure that it's equitable in the sense that you don't want someone to have to be independently wealthy to serve as, a developer of people. That's not fair. So develop a policy, communicate the policy, and review the financial implications of that policy. If you're
yeah,
going to, and you might need to update your budget accordingly, because you can't just say, oh, yeah, the church will provide that. From what line item? If the line
yeah,
item doesn't exist, your accountant will go, where are we putting this? Uh, so you'll have to have that conversation. If you're going to have these training events and you didn't have existing training events and you're going to provide food for these training events, where's that coming from? Or if they're materials. So you're going to want to think through that and make a plan. It's not just financial resources that you could be lacking, it could be time. And I'm just going to tell you, I tell churches this all the time on the implementation is it's going to be more work for you than what you're currently doing for the first 6 to 12 months. It will be more time. It's going to be more time intensive. But once you've implemented the pipeline, it's scalable and it's actually a better way to manage your time. But you have to kind of just push through that and go, all right, this is going to be really hard for a season, and then we're going to come through the other end of it. And you just have to believe me. I mean, you just got to trust the process.
yeah.
You may also have some technology issues. Go, all right, do we have the infrastructure that we need for this? So if
Yeah,
we're going to
very
be
good point.
doing coaching meetings, how are we collecting the results of those?
Yeah,
You could be as simple as a Google form, and then those things are collecting, but then you want to think through privacy issues, like how are we measuring that? So maybe we're going to integrate something with our church management software. There are all kinds of ways that you could handle this, but you want to
yeah.
think through that and make sure that you've got the technology in place to handle those things.
Yeah, well, the integration of church management software might be part of your leadership pipeline
That's right. You might not
rollout.
be using it at all right now. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe you're going to have a new subscription cost or some training costs for that.
So
So
those are the things that are just kind of like hidden, not hidden on our end, but just hidden on your end and going, oh, we hadn't thought about this. Like,
yeah,
well, this is a thing we hadn't. We're trying to preemptively bring those things up to you.
yep. There you go. Okay, so that's the second challenge, resource challenge,
Yep.
to as a barrier to implementing a leadership pipeline. The third one is unclear expectations and accountability set on the front end. Now, I
Yep.
think if you follow the process right going into this, expectations should be met, but there's always that danger still. And so
Mhm.
so a barrier to this may be from the people that are going to, your volunteers are going to be moved into this new system, by not having clearly communicated to them how is this going to look differently for you,
Mhm.
and making sure that that's super clear, especially in regards to clearly defined roles and responsibilities in their level of service that they're engaged in. You
Yep.
may not have written job descriptions right now, but that's going to be one of the early pieces of implementation in the leadership pipeline design process. And so there might be things that get put down in writing that they might go, "Oh, I didn't know that's what I was supposed to be doing," or time allocations that they were not aware of. So we just have to communicate clearly when when two parties are communicating and there's missed expectations on the receiver. This is kind of how we started this, Scott, at the top. You shouldn't always assume it's the receiver's issue. It could
Mhm.
be the sender of the information that hasn't maybe communicated it as clearly as they could have, and then we end up kind of missing each other, and we have to manage emotions then in how we reconcile. So
Mhm.
these are some foundational things in emotional intelligence and communicating clearly and maturely. But regardless, you're going to bump up against some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here, this challenge is just really centered on unclear expectations. So people not knowing what's different about the process or what's different about my role. And it's purely, as you've said, a communication challenge. So one of the very first things that we're going to have you do in the implementation follow-up is work on your job descriptions or position descriptions. And we give a very prescriptive model for putting those together. So even if you have existing job descriptions for your volunteer roles, they need to have the same components across all your ministries, because sometimes there's a wide degree of variation. Children's ministry ones are usually pretty thorough. The ones in student ministry are usually a little bit less thorough. And then there are other ministries that maybe don't have any job description at all. And so we want them to have the same components, the same elements, kind of a unified structure to how that, and they're going to include things like time requirements, including the time requirements for training, because you don't want anyone going, well, I didn't know I was going to have these coaching meetings, or where'd this event come from? And is this an expectation, or is this a recommendation? You want you'd like for me to come to this, or you're
Yeah.
expecting me to come to this?
Yeah. That's got to be clear.
Um, it's got to be clear. I was just joking with AJ. At the time that we're recording, by the time you're listening to this, school will be out. But when we're recording this, school is not yet out for my kids. And I had an email interaction with one of my kids' teachers, and it's unclear actually which day is the last day of school, um, based on what's been communicated with us. So I emailed the teacher and explicitly asked, does my child need to go to school on X date? And the response I got was, here is the school calendar. Use your discernment on that day. What does that mean? Just say yes or no. Say yes, there is school that day, or no, there is no school that day. I'm still baffled. Like, I'm baffled. I'm going like,
You
it's
are
just
left
up
now
to
to
me.
interpret it, and your interpretation is going to be school will be there. My kid doesn't have to go and probably won't.
I guess. I don't know. We'll see what happens next week. But um, do you see what that teacher probably perceived that to be a very politically correct answer? I don't mean politically correct in the cultural sense. I mean nuanced. But that wasn't helpful.
Yeah.
It would have been more helpful for her to be clear. Likewise, don't couch your language with your folks. Be like, well, it'd be great if you could come. We would love to. We say this at church. We would love to see you at our training event. What does we would love to see you mean? Does that mean you're expecting me to be there?
Sounds pretty optional to me.
Yeah, we'd love to see you feels optional. Right. So, and people will hate what you're doing really quickly if you're unclear.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I'd have to respond with, I'm sorry, I'll be depriving you of the love of seeing me. So I will not be attending.
but if they said, hey, this is a key aspect of being a part of the team, is
Yeah.
we really need every person there so that you can get the information you need to be successful in your role. That's a completely different conversation than we'd love to see you at such
Yeah.
a event.
And don't follow it up with, if you can't attend, we'll meet with you one-on-one on Zoom and totally catch you up on that.
Oh, you should totally do that to pressure them in. All right, let's move on to number 4.
Number 4, inconsistent implementation. So we have to have a uniformity. We're primarily speaking to the staff level. It's level 4, if you recall back a couple of episodes. I mean, well, 100%. When you're at the staff level, we've got to have your buy-in, full participation when things are rolled out church-wide. It just can't be optional. And so then we need you to actually live that out. You can't say, oh, okay, yeah. And then it's your teams that aren't really kind of doing this. You're not really holding them accountable to things. So we have to have consistent implementation. Otherwise, we've just built another way to have siloed ministries and there's regardless, we're all working together in this. When if somebody's area is not going to be fully participating in something, it affects more than them. I mean, the body is affected by that, and so we've got to get. You don't have to be the early adopter, 100% buy-in, but you do have to recognize that this is bigger than me, and hopefully leadership has expressed how this is a positive change, though it may be tough for a season. And just go ahead and make that change. Get in there and see how it will work out for the better as you move
Yeah.
through it. But inconsistent implementation is definitely a barrier to full and successful implementation of a pipeline in your church.
Don't have much to add here. I've already said that there's a big time demand in the early days of implementation, which will cause your less fastidious staff people to want to avoid working on it. And if you tolerate that behavior, then it disincentivizes the rest of the team from doing it. And so it's normal for you to have some lagging volunteer teams that they don't, you've got some leader you put in place. They're supposed to be doing their coaching. They're not doing their coaching. We can deal with that because we'll get them up to speed eventually, or we'll replace that leader. But the staff that it no, we're going to turn the screws on the staff and expect them to as graciously as we can. We're going to expect them to follow through on their implementation, and if they don't, there has to be consequences. Otherwise, the whole endeavor is put in jeopardy, and I can't understate or overstate. I can't overstate how damaging that is churchwide.
Mm,
If you once you start communicating, hey, we're making these changes to our leadership structure to make it better for you as a leader, you start communicating those things, and then it fizzles out after 6 months because
yeah,
your team was too lazy to execute. That says all kinds of just justifiably bad things about your team.
yeah,
Um, and you're going to lose trust. So, cautionary tale. I mean, don't do this unless you're ready to commit. But I promise you, if you are willing to commit, there's a lot of upside on the back end of it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've just we got everybody working together. We just do. It's got to be the
Hey,
thing.
can I say one side note?
Sure, you can.
It just kind of dawned on me like this whole not a serious series has made it.
Yeah.
We've been communicating this as if every church has multiple staff and so on.
Hmm.
Um, I, even in small churches, you can execute these principles. They need to be, this is like totally extraneous to this particular topic, but I'm mentioning it here. We just adapt them. So if you're like, hey, we're a church of 100 people, and we have one part-time pastor. Okay, you're like, so the pipeline's not for us then? No, it is. We just apply it differently. We take the principles, we apply the principles, we take the same levels, we apply the levels, and then as the church grows, we start to replace things that are volunteer positions with paid positions. But same principles are at play. They're just scaled down
Yeah.
appropriately.
We did mention a few episodes ago.
I think we did that in the first episode, but here
Yeah,
we're
that staff level could be paid or unpaid. But perhaps, I'm sure, especially some of the smaller churches that, that we have worked with, are working with, and are listening. They may not be thinking about necessarily a staff level with their volunteers. So, yeah, it could be a bit of a mind
yeah.
shift for
I've had
some.
I've had a situation. I'll give a very brief example. Church I worked with in Alabama, smaller church. They now have two staff, so they're kind of growing into their structure, to be honest with you. But when we first did the uh, pipeline process with them, they only had just their pastor. And he's a level 5 leader. Um, and they have elders, but then they have deacons. So they had deacons who are unpaid, serve as the level 4, overseeing particular areas, and then they had volunteer teams underneath each of those deacon areas. So
Yeah.
that's one way to
Uh-huh.
apply it. And then over time, they're replacing those deacon roles with paid staff positions.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good interim solution. All right, our last challenge is just in measuring and sustaining progress that you might be making. As with anything in the church, I mean, we would advocate that goals are set, measures are developed, and progress is monitored, so that you can see it. So in the rollout and the implementation of the leadership pipeline process, there's phases of implementation, there's tasks that need to be accomplished. We need to be measuring the progress of those. Are we fully implemented? Are we partially implemented? What areas of ministry are on what track to be completing this? And then then the process itself is laid out for the assessing, training, launching of leaders as you go. So it's all process oriented, and anytime you have a process and an ongoing thing, we need to be measuring its success and function. So not doing that, especially in the implementation phase of monitoring the complete rollout of it, something could slip through the cracks. Someone or somebody, some aspect of it that might delay the full implementation. So yeah, we need to develop some metrics to be able to monitor how is our increase going. Again, the idea here that we're going to have more people qualified to serve in the church. We're going to have better qualified people serving in roles that are the best fit for them. So, there's it may not be, wholesale change, but there's some shuffling happening, and we're hoping to elevate everybody, rise everybody up to a higher level of ability and effectiveness in their particular area of ministry.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add here because this is going to vary so much from church to church. So I'll only say what I say to every church I work with, which is one knee-jerk way to know whether or not your leadership pipeline stuff is working is, did we reach our goals as a church? Whatever those goals might be. If you're not hitting those goals that you've hopefully set as a church, and if you've gone through a strategic envisioning process, you've definitely set goals. If you've not hit those, almost always, it's a leadership gap. We can go back and go, that leadership light bulb is burned out. It's not as bright as it needs to be. We're not as effective. And so we can revisit, were we consistent in our training? What was the adoption rate in those things? And you could get more granular and analyze where those breakdowns were. But just as like a knee-jerk gut check, are we being successful in our pipeline? Is look at all your other goals, not related to the pipeline, as it relates to baptism or to outreach or to discipleship or to number of people in groups or how many people we're bringing in, who new guests join. All of those things would be indicators, because all those things are driven by leadership. And so if we're failing in our other goals, that's telling us that we have a leadership problem that's driving it, probably.
Yeah.
And so that might cause you then to dive deeper and go, where was the breakdown?
Yeah.
So I'm not giving specific advice here because it's going to be contextually dependent, but just as a general rule, look at your overall goals. If you hit them, your leadership's probably pretty healthy. If you didn't hit them, there's probably a breakdown in the leadership somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've covered quite a bit of ground here in a fairly short period of time on barriers that you might come up against in implementing your leadership pipeline design. So, Scott, I don't think I mentioned this at all last week, but you're going to be doing pipeline with the church in Spain here in a couple of months. In September, you're going to be implementing this again with one of our churches outside of the U.S.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I don't know. I know a couple of people from the church I've met elsewhere in another event. So I'm looking forward to seeing them again in person. And this is something, they're actually a good sized church in Spain, but they've got some unique cultural factors at play. It's not an American church.
Yeah.
So they view time differently. So those are things we'll have to work through, like
Yeah.
the cultural perceptions. They don't the day in Spain doesn't get going until what, 10 a.m.,
It's
10:30?
yeah, it's a different pace. Yeah.
It's a different pace. They're eating dinner at 11 p.m.
They
It's a
work hard.
different
They work long days.
they
They do.
work long
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
It's a different set of hours. And so I'm looking forward to taking these concepts and principles and working to translate them in an environment where they perceive time differently, they perceive engagement differently, but that doesn't get us away from these core concepts that are derived from Exodus 18:24. And but they can apply in any context.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
look
that's
forward to it.
bonus. That's a bonus trip too, because one of our Europe-based guides that does strategic envisioning is also going to be able to complete training to be able to lead churches through leadership pipeline design also. So that's going to be really exciting. That's happening because people like you and churches like yours are investing some of your missions resources into helping us make those kinds of trips happen. And you can learn more about our primary initiative right now to build that out, called Operation Gideon, over at malfersgroup.com/Gideon. So go over there and look at that, the work that we're doing around the world, because we would love to have your partnership and support in that to help you achieve your missions goals, which I'm sure involve bringing the gospel to the nations around the world. And so we're helping equip leaders and churches to do just that. So go to malfersgroup.com/Gideon and see what you can do to help make that happen wherever we go. We'd love to tell you about that more and be able to keep you updated as a member of the Gideon's army there. This has been episode 245 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. So go to malfersgroup.com/245 for today's article. The YouTube videos over there, and you can click over and watch the exciting episode that this was.
Riveting. Yeah. All right,
Hey,
we'll
this
see you next week.
this is the conclusion of the not a serious series on leadership. So thank you
Who
for being
knows
with
what
us.
we're talking about next week?
Our audience is either double what it was when we started or half. I'm not sure. But I don't know
Probably
what
neither of those things, actually.
I don't know what we're talking about next week, but it won't be leadership pipeline design. You can be assured of that. Thanks for
Hey,
being
I
with
know
us.
what we're talking about next week.
Okay, well,
That'll be a surprise to you, but not
let's
to me.
communicate clearly afterwards. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Yeah.